Hello all. So today we're going to look at how to use ffmpeg as a post-processing program to edit our videos to maybe look a bit better here and there. So specifically we're going to cover two artifact killers in our discussion here. And the first one is gradfun and the other one is nlmeans. And nlmeans is actually a denoiser by design here. And what I mean by that is if you have footage like this, it's kind of old, kind of grainy, VHS era type footage, well, what you can actually do is if you apply nlmeans, you can take that noise, the staticky stuff, right out of it. So you're left with a kind of blurry kind of image underneath that, depending on it, might be really hard on the eyes. This is really hard on the eyes. Please don't make me look at that again. It's actually better with a noise filter on top. Just yeah, definitely better without the noise out of it. But in terms of making up for the shortcomings of gradfun and nlmeans, there's a couple other filters you can pair with them. Specifically the unsharp command here. So unsharp is basically a sharpener, but if you put negative values, you can use it as a blur or whatever the word is, the Gaussian blur. And it's pretty much a static kind of sharpener, static blur effect you'd apply to the entire video, but it's really quite powerful, and it really does apply to each of the frames quite nicely. And so I use that quite a bit. And other than that, we're going to look at just a basic scale filter, just, to do upscales or stuff like that. And we're going to look at a basic kind of brightness and saturation that you can use to correct some of the issues you get with gradfun and nlmeans in terms of their color balance. They end up modifying it a little bit. So instead of going off to another program, which these are in pretty much any program, brightness and saturation for example, you can do it right here without needing to re-encode a second time. So I'm just including these commands just for the sake of cleaning up these two pretty much. And for the sake of argument, I'll include this one. And this is pretty much what you would use if you want a kind of faster processing speed if you're uploading something like YouTube or another streaming site. So it just allows your video to upload a bit faster or process a bit faster specifically, I believe. But just something good to know if you didn't know how to toss that. You just toss that in the back of your command right for the output. Pretty much is pretty good enough. Alright, so in terms of the unsharp command, in terms of this one here, I don't want to look at it again, but I'll just show you a quick example. So this is with the sharpening applied. It's a lot easier to look at. I can actually look at this and not have to wince here compared to this, which I don't want to look at. Yeah, so it makes quite the difference. And this is like overkill, like really high sharpening setting. You can see the kind of limitations of even sharpening as it kind of brings out a jaggedness of lines here and there if you go too overkill. But this is a much better improvement over this thing here. I'd take this any day. So let's jump right into it, I guess. So for the purposes of this video, we are going to be looking at a specific video. This one here. Call it up, and I'll just hide this. So in this video here, what we're going to find is, well, actually I'll give you a better representation off the bat here. So I have an image here, a still image, a single frame of the video we're going to look at, in other words. And as you can see here, we have this kind of pixelization. And these are really bad artifacts pretty much. And what we're going to see is we have like a whole kind of donut kind of shape of artifacts going around the characters here. And it's really bad up here, pretty bad here, and we're going to see it's pretty bad here as well as the frames move up and down, and it goes all the way to the floor here and up around, and just, yeah, it's pretty bad. And what we're going to try and do is take this frame and turn it into this here. So this is the work of the gradfun and sharpener video filters, and it's going back, forward, back, forward. You can see the main difference is definitely found here and definitely found everywhere pretty much. So we clean those artifacts right up. And the other one we look at is nlmeans, And let's go to that one there now. So in terms of the artifacts, they are a bit more pronounced in this one. But going back to the original here, and back to nlmeans, the original nlmeans, if you look here, for example, the original nlmeans, it does clean up quite a bit in other places that you might not usually see right off the bat. So the main difference with nlmeans is it kind of retains the shading of the original. So back to the original here. So the original is here, and nlmeans, it applies like a greenish kind of tinge, as you can see there. It's a case of kind of cleaning up a bunch of the artifacts, applying a kind of greenish tinge, but at the same time kind of keeping the shading, as you can kind of see here, more intact than say the gradfun filter, which, you know, the shading pretty much gets jotted right out there. So let's look at a video version, because images can only tell you so much. Okay, so I have my video here, and as you can see here, the artifacts are moving right around, and it's going around, like I said. You can see them very clearly here. It's like a big donut kind of shape here, and you can see them on the door, not as easily, but here definitely, and down here, and even on the floor, and in the shadows here. The characters are pretty okay as they are. There's like I said, it's literally a donut shape. The center's okay, the outsides are okay-ish, but yeah, definitely up here is fairly evident. So with the gradfun filter, if we apply that, for example, we get something like this. So immediately you notice the pixelization is pretty much gone. It's still a little bit here and there, but in its place, if we just go back to the original and back to gradfun, and back to the original, and back to gradfun, and back to the original, and back to gradfun, and if you're looking at the floor, for example, as you go back to the gradfun, you notice things have blurred up quite a bit. So this is where the sharpen comes in, and we'll see if we apply a sharpen of just something like this, we get a fairly ideal alternative to the original of this. So if we maximize our gradfun settings of sharpen, we end up with this. And this is pretty ideal, definitely fairly acceptable. We still have some artifacts going on here and here, but it's not something you really notice unless you look for it, compared to the original where it's really in your face here. So a fairly major improvement. So let's look at the nlmeans. So this is the original, going to nlmeans. And yeah, nlmeans, like we saw in the picture, it is a bit more pronounced, the artifacts, but the shading is a bit better. So that also helps to mask it a bit, and maybe the movement isn't as bad in some places like here, for example. And if we apply the sharpener to the nlmeans, we get something like this. That might be even a little bit better. Oh, it's definitely a bit better, but I mean here it does make it a bit more pronounced. Then it's definitely way better than the original, as you can see here. So we'll go to the original, we'll go to gradfun, and we'll go to nlmeans. And I think there's no real dispute that nlmeans or gradfun is a major improvement over the original here. And so we're going to look at this in a bit more detail and the kind of trade-offs to using these. But yeah, let's actually jump right into things right now. And what we'll do is I'll show you how to do the commands. So we're going to call up the original in the background here, and I'm just going to go into the very start point, because why not? And we're going to use ffplay here. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to preview the changes in ffplay before we actually render them out with ffmpeg. So it's a very useful thing to know how to do. So in terms of applying these filters. They're all video filters, so we use the flag -vf. Then we're going to start with gradfun. So we just call it the name gradfun, and just equals to the first argument. And the first argument is the strength, and this is anywhere between literally 0.51 to 64 in its values, and the default for this is 1.2. And with the other thing is called the radius, but the strength, for example, so the default is 1.2, let's just do 1.2 for now. And then to call up the second argument, we need to separate them. So we do a colon, and then the second argument comes from 8 to 32 in its values, and this is known as the radius. And by default it's set to 16 here. And to actually display this, we just need to specify an input now. So we could do -i like ffmpeg, but we don't actually need to. And we do movie.mkv, which is the movie file that is in this folder here, which is the exact same as the one in the background, which was on the desktop there. So just calling this up, what's gonna happen?
When Philip gets back, you are leaving.
So we get our video overlaid, and I don't really like having the audio there because it's a bit distracting, so I'll just toss a AN to silence it. Okay, so this is pretty much how the format of the video is going to be shown, because I don't really like putting things in little kind of windows off to the side, because you can't really see them very easily in terms of these artifacts and whatnot. But what I'll do is in the description, I'll post on Imgur all of the differences, like those images I showed you before. Basically, I'll post those up and the commands I use, and so you can kind of compare them more side by side-ish. But in terms of seeing things, I'm going to be using this method. It may not be the best method, but I think it's better than having little windows where you can't see the details that you need to see, type of a thing. So going back and forth, there's not much difference here to be seen. So let's just talk about the first argument then. So the strength one. So strength generally you want to keep under 15, I'd say. So I'll just show you what it's like at 15 and the default radius at 16. So as you can see, the picture pretty much is light straight up here. So what's going to happen when our strength goes basically above 10 is we get some very noticeable kind of brightness happening here. It's almost like a glow kind of command happening here. And as well, we get a blur happening here as well. So you can kind of think of the brightness and the radius as going hand in hand here. And what the radius is going to do, I'll show you that right now, is if we have, well, we'll put a fairly mild strength of 5, and we'll bring the radius straight up to 32, the max here. So the main difference is you see this kind of rectangle here. It just kind of comes down the cabinet here. So that wasn't there before at all. But if you kind of look closely, you can kind of make out some lines here. Just very, very subtly. And going into our filter, it really brings it up. So what happens with the radius is it basically smooths out the strength's effects into the existing frame. But it doesn't, what it actually does as a side effect though, is it creates a difference between finer details and normal details. So any kind of finer details might kind of pop up in kind of negative ways, like we saw with that thing here. Let's show you again. So yeah, that's kind of in the way. Arguably just as bad as the artifacts themselves, as you see here. So if we go too high with our radius, we get stuff like that. But if we go too low with it, as we see, we get the kind of too much brightness caused by the strength one there, because we're not able to even it out in the frame properly. So based on this, we can probably conclude for this frame that we want to keep it under 10, the strength anyway. So this is just 10 and 16. So in terms of this, it's also too much differentiation going on here. So let's bring down the strength even more to 5 and 16, for example. And this is fairly okay. As we can see, our artifacts are pretty much gone from the original. So original was here, and we went to here. So those are smoothed out. So what you want to do pretty much when using this gradfun filter is find the values where the artifacts are pretty much taken out to the extent that you're okay with, without kind of overdoing the brightness change and the blurriness. So just take it to the extent that you need to get the artifacts out of the scene. So in this case, I found 3.5 and 16 was a good setting here. As we see here, that's fairly good. We see the bit of rectangular stuff happening here. So I could bring the radius down a bit more, but what I'll find is the, brightness of it goes up a bit more, and the blurriness is a bit worse if I do that. So it's kind of a trade-off. You can't really see much here. But I could bring it down to the radius from 16 to 12 if I wanted to, for example. But you wouldn't notice much difference. But it would be a bit better here, and yeah, it is fairly up to you at this point what you want to do. But yeah, so I ended up going with 3.5 and 16 for this one here. And as I mentioned before, the blurriness is what's left in this situation. So the artifacts are pretty good now, not a big deal. But the other thing to take note of is the degree of the blurriness, I guess, here. So if we look at the floor here, and look at the here in particular, and we'll go back to the original here, the floor is a lot more detailed here. And we can see a lot more here and here and here. Let's go back one more time. And things are just a lot blurrier, and getting out of this, yeah, it's quite the difference. So as you might imagine, we went through, or just mentioned very briefly, the unsharp filter. And this is actually going to be our saving grace here. And what we're going to do is apply it after gradfun, because if we apply it before gradfun, it's going to apply sharpen, and then gradfun is going to apply over top of that sharpen, and it's going to look really, really bad. But the command we're going to use, and I hate writing this thing out, so I'm going to cheat and just copy it, is unsharp equals and let's just copy it in, then I'll explain. Okay, so when you have more than one video filter, you just put a comma and just write the next argument right after. So the argument is, or the filter we're using rather, is unsharp. Then the first argument is LX, and this is an L, not a 1, so please take note of that. And we're just saying for the x-axis, rather this way, we're not, maybe not x-axis, but the x, this direction that my mouse is going in, the blur, the sharpness or blur is going to be a value at 13. And this goes from like, well, like I said, it goes to negative values. So I think from negative 20 to 20 is a fairly safe bet on where this will go to. I haven't actually looked it up or tried all those values because I haven't needed to. But yeah, then you do the same thing for the y. So you move to the next argument by putting a colon, and then ly is equal to 13. And generally you want to keep these two the same if you want a more, well, a consistent sharpen anyways, which is what we want. And the optional value here is LA, which functions as a multiplier. So you can just think of it as, in this case, 1.5, so 150% more of the regular, whether 1313 would have given us type thing. So it's just an easy way to change this single value to, increase your sharpness or decrease it by a fair amount. And this goes up to 5. And I actually used 5 on that crazy little kitty picture before, as we saw there. Okay. And yeah, we can actually try this out in ffplay, see what happens now. Let's do that. Okay. So with this, we see, going back to the original, yeah, this is not too great here. So I think our sharpen was a bit too powerful, it looks like. But in terms of here, that's pretty good. And if we just take the sharpen off a little bit to kind of get rid of this weirdness going on here, I think we should be fairly good. Because in terms of the original, this is pretty better, especially when we look at the characters here and the floor. Let's look at the floor, for example, to start out with the difference here. So we pretty much redefined the floor and took out some content, but we kind of made new kind of features, the main selling point here as well. So it's actually it's less blurred than the original, and the features have changed and the coloring has changed a little bit. So if we change our filter a little bit, so I think 1.5 is a bit too much as a multiplier, so we'll just change it back to 1 here and see how that looks here. Okay, I think that's pretty nice. I don't know about you, but compared to our original, we don't have that weirdness that was happening with 1.5 as strongly. We could maybe bring this down even a little bit more if we wanted to. But in terms of having killed the artifacts pretty well, and in terms of retaining our details, and in terms of cleaning up the characters here, because sharpen, as we'll see if we go back to the original briefly, that's really quite blurry, the characters are here, and sharpen just lights everything up, so it really brings stuff to life here. And you do need to be a bit careful about this, because if it had maybe overlays in this scene, for example, it would really differentiate them from the original base footage, and so that's just something to be careful of. And as well, in terms of viewing the actual original footage, it can be a bit maybe disorienting or a bit difficult to view it if you sharpen a bit too much. But I guess it's really up to you as a viewer, and if you're maybe unfairly comparing it to the original, if you had seen the original. But there's no real denying between how in focus her face is here versus how blurry it is here, which one is the preferred, and as well as the artifacts, just playing that again. Yeah, there's really no comparison between the two that you would choose to have here. So this one you would choose hands down for this particular scene. So even though the trade-offs is we are basically taking out a lot of details here and there, and especially with the shading is the main problem with the gradfun filter here. So we took out a lot of the shading here. It's going back to the original one more time. So the differences in shading, and we kind of brightened everything as well. So that wasn't, well, in this case it's not too much of a difference in brightness, but it has been brightened out a little bit. But overall, the benefits outweigh the negatives, definitely for this scene. But we would want to be careful. We would want to be careful rather, if we applied this to multiple different scenes, because we might run into scenes where we take out too much detail, and like we're pretty much simplifying this scene to a scene where we have more simpler kind of objects. Like we're taking details out of all the objects, and we are putting more detail into the characters though. So it just happens to work well with this scene, as we are taking focus from around here and putting it back to the characters, which was what the scene is all about, was the characters to begin with. So just be aware of the relationships when you're choosing your settings and what kind of sharpness you choose to take, pretty much. Alright, I think that covers gradfun pretty well. Let's skip ahead to nlmeans. And I'm actually going to keep the sharpness yeah, to save time, we'll just keep the sharpness in there because we covered that already. But let's just call it nlmeans. So nlmeans is fairly simple. We just type nlmeans. And if you wanted to, you could type in equals and do anywhere from 1 to 10, I believe. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to get the other documentation working properly. So it is on the website there. If you want to give it a go, I'll put a link to it. But I don't know the format to get it to work, because every time I try it says it doesn't recognize the arguments that I call up, which are the ones that are listed on the site to begin with. But in terms of nlmeans, let's just have a look. And what you'll see is this is really slow. Like, this is literally 100 times slower than my normal rendering would be. And this is one of the main drawbacks of nlmeans in really any capacity, is the sheer slowness of it, and it's creating so much lag right now that we might need to, yeah, let's actually just make a still image instead here. So we're going to actually change our command here to ffmpeg. We'll specify our input, which was our movie.mkv. And we're pretty much just changing the order of things here. And I'm just going to specify an output. We'll just call it nlmeans. And I'm going to make it a PNG image in this case. And what this is going to do, and it's going to render just the first single frame as a PNG. Then it's going to say, what happened where I can only render one frame? And it's going to give me an error message, which is a-okay. Even that single frame, just how long that took to do, is just absolutely insane. But yeah, so here we have that here. And yeah, this is actually the exact same as I had before, apparently. Okay, so just recapping, I guess. Let's go to So here was our original again, and with the gradfun we got to this, which is fairly good. And just back to the original, see the details got taken out, the overall brightness got increased. So this is a fairly good way to seeing things. Again, this is the original, the artifacts, whatnot, not too good. We look at the detail of the characters, and then we go to gradfun again here. We really brought it to life a bit, and very subtly in this one here. So it's just a 1.0. I think I brought the sharpening down a little bit more when I did this image here. But yeah, so this would be my ideal here. And the other one, nlmeans, is over, and this is nlmeans. And comparing gradfun here with nlmeans, you can see the differences here. So the greenish tinge, the worse artifacts in some places anyways, and the shading in particular. So we look at the lighting here, just this part right here. Very quickly with the remaining commands, we have an image here. It is 1380 by 1726. And let's try the scale command on this. So I'm going to use ffmpeg here. -I, the name, greg.png, and we'll call it the video filter, and the name of the filter scale, and equal to the first argument, which is going to be changing this 1380 to whatever I want. So let's change it to 500. Then the next argument, and we're going to make let's make it 300. And that's pretty much it. And we'll just make our output greg scale.png. So we go from this to this. So the other change to that is if we did a -1 on the second argument, and what this will do is make a uniform scale. So as we'll see here, let's just call it something slightly different. So we maintain the original like we had back here, even though we are much smaller now. So 500 by 625 ended up being 625 in order to get a uniform downscale happening there. And just the very last command, let's go over the brightness very quickly. So we're going to do both of them at the same time. So comma, and the other one is EQ is equal to brightness, which is equal to a value of 0 by default. So let's go that will go 0 here. And the second argument is a contrast. So contrast is equal to, this will be 1 by default. We'll make that 0.5. So if I went 0, it'd be pretty grayscale-y, but we should have a little bit of color, but it's going to be a lot darker here. And yeah, everything got a bit more gray, going towards the grayscale. So that's pretty much it. You can use those commands in conjunction with the gradfun and nlmeans. And if we were outputting a video, again, we could just use that, what is it? Little movie plus faststart NB, and just toss that right before the output, whatever that would have been. So I guess here it would have been, but this would assume a video format in this case, because there's not really any point to doing it for images. Okay, that's all. Thanks, bye.